Today I'm joined by Vishal Suthram. He's a really good friend of mine. We go way back when we went to high school together. I remember when he moved from Minnesota, and he was one of the first friends I've made down in the library. Vishal, you want to give a quick intro to people who don't know who you are yet?
Yeah, hi, my name is Vishal Suthram. I'm a freshman at UAB, majoring in Biomedical Sciences. I'm a pre-med with the intention of becoming a psychiatrist. And in this podcast, I'll be talking about some of my mental health experiences and how this one made me want to be a psychiatrist.
Vishal, it's good to have you here today.
Thank you, Shoria. Good to have you.
Before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about um, your experience with mental health, and you were telling me about what you called avoidance syndrome. What does that mean exactly? And
Okay.
how has that impacted your education?
Okay, so it impacted the first a lot of my education. It probably stunted my growth as a learner at some point, because what happens with avoidance syndrome is I was one of those kids that was repeatedly told he was intelligent, and it didn't really and to keep this image of me, of this intelligent person, I avoided challenging tasks and only did what came easy to me. This led to me to have very gaping weaknesses, like when some basic skills like coordination, and some coordination like motor skills, activities are I'm very deficient in, and I basically avoided challenging things for a very long time. And this is why I wasn't a very good student until I reached my sophomore year of high school.
So, I mean, so you were told in the beginning that you were gifted, and then what sort of made you turn back around and say, "Hey, I want to sort of start challenging myself again"?
I realized that being smart is like only 20% of the equation. I remember reading a book called Grit by Angela Duckworth, and it said, and this is grit is like a combination of your passion and perseverance. And I found that I'd rather be complimented on my work ethic rather than my intelligence, because my intelligence is innate, but and my work ethic is something that I've earned. It's something that I've worked towards. So yeah, I've just learned to be more work oriented rather than result oriented.
How problematic do you think it is that we, at least when students, when they're very young, they enter the education system at around age 4 or 5, and they're quickly classified by their teachers as, this student's going to succeed, this student's not going to succeed. I
Yeah.
don't know. I know you probably know this because you're a psych student, but there's a famous study called the Rosenthal study, or it's called the Pygmalion Effect, where basically they did a study where the teachers were told certain students were meant to succeed and some students weren't. But in reality, the researchers told the, the teachers random names, right? They didn't like Bobby is not actually someone who's going to succeed. They just made,
Exactly. And
and
it
then at
had a
the end of the year, they noticed that the same students who the teacher was told were the exceptional students ended up having the best test scores. And that just simply shows that part of it is just who you pay attention to.
it's who you pay attention to, and just the principle of their identities. Like if you classified some certain the bright students as not intelligent, and look what happened. They didn't perform as much. They did not perform as well as they would have if they had the attention. Rather, and then you can see how some of the people that were labeled as less intelligent flourished when given this extra attention and extra work by the teacher. It's all about how you can do multiple. There's a multitude of experiments that are done on subjects like these, and it shows that young learners is it's a shows that the teachers need to there's a gap in the way in our education system. It's not just the education system. It's rather on what we as a society plays an emphasis on. For example, we always glorify and sensationalize just this idea of intelligence, like how, and like we don't really, the same is not done for the value of hard work. And like I want to see more of an education, more emphasis on grit and hard work rather than result oriented intelligence. And this will probably lead to more students like staying in school and performing well.
Yeah, I think so. Because when you have, students who do not perform well in school, they're usually led to believe it's because of themselves, because they don't lack the desire, the ambition, they don't have the X factor that that the teachers expect. And that makes sense to a degree. I mean, part of it is definitely due to how much you want to learn, but it is, I mean, it's definitely not something that is addressed at all, that a lot of it is due to this innate component. And that brings me to my next point, and this is a pretty big conversation, but the small fish, big pond debate. What do you make of that?
Okay, so to the listeners, the small fish big pond debate is essentially, I learned about this in a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, in which he talked about where there was a student that went to a very large public school that was very prestigious, and a student that went to a smaller school, student B, that went to a less smaller, less prestigious school. And it seems that the student B, in most scenarios he described, would perform better, and it was due to the imposter syndrome faced by the students at student A, the more prestigious college. And now, sure, you go to Johns Hopkins. I'm sure at some point you'll be forced, maybe faced with this imposter syndrome. I'm sure most medical students even are. I'll be doing that soon. So, what do you make of imposter syndrome, and what do you think we can do to combat it?
Well, I think some part of imposter syndrome is ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's
And
all.
in some sense, I think it's required because it does humble you a little bit, right? Because you need to, I think there always needs to be a healthy sense of self doubt that whenever you do something, you should think, well, is this the right thing for me? And it's,
Yeah.
I mean, evolutionarily, it's probably a self defense mechanism. But when it comes to education, sometimes it can stifle you from starting new opportunities, right? Because you don't typically see like the computer science math student joining a politics club,
Yeah,
humanities students joining a neuroscience club, right?
yeah,
We don't really have much cross-sectional activity among students, and part of that is because of imposter syndrome, because they don't think they can do it for whatever reason. So when
yeah.
it comes to being in a big pond as a small fish, you need to be, the best thing is that you always have people who challenge you. But like we were talking about earlier, if you were someone who was told that you're always, you're not, like, say you're not meant to cut it out in the world, and then you enter a big pond, I'm not sure whether the big pond is going to do much for you if you personally don't feel like you're going to succeed.
Yeah, and I'm sure that most people who who are like, let's say you are very high in your class in high school, and you go to a very competitive school and a competitive college, you'll see that you're not surrounded by just like a plethora of average people. You're surrounded by people who have of your caliber, and that can lead to humility, but it can also overwhelm you, and that's, I think, a reason why people, this is the big fish, being a small fish in a big pond is uh very difficult.
Well, do you think that there's, the fact that we're all told pretty much when we're younger, whether we're smart or dumb, what made to cut it out in the world? Do you think that effect is compounded when you were a big fish in a small pond?
In what sense is it compounded?
No, I'm asking, do you think it's compounded? Because I would say, if I had to make the case for it, that if you are told that you are very intelligent, you are very good at this, and you start to build an image of yourself in which you see yourself as this incredibly gifted, talented person. And when you're then surrounded in an environment where you're the big fish in a small pond,
Yeah.
where you seem like you're the best, and not only do you feel that you're the best, but everything around you seems to objectively seem to prove that judgment you have about yourself.
Yes, and I
Then
think that,
that may not be the case, right? So I think in some way that personal hubris, if that's what you want to call it, can get compounded. And I think that
yeah,
can
it does get compounded. And I think that you bring up an interesting point, because I think at some point in everyone's life, they're gonna be a small fish in a big pond. And that if you're a big fish and you're thriving, you're flourishing, you don't see what's next. There you don't you see that you are in this pool of people, you are talented, you are gifted, you are performing better. But at some point, due to your performance, you will be placed with people of more of your caliber, and it's all about how you react. It's all about the individual and the individual success. And the biggest, like I read this book called Grit, and the biggest predictor, they said, for basically and most academic success, like retention and school, everything, is grit. And it's like a combination of passion and perseverance, because people can like things for like people passion, because it all depends on passion, because you can like something, but how much do you like it? How long are you willing to sustain this interest? Because I know people that jump from interest to interest to interest, and I kind of used to be one of these people. I used to have phases, and it's very hard to like narrow down on a singular focus. And yeah, and I think that grit is a very big thing if you want to succeed in college and basically in life in general, I guess.
I read this. I didn't read this. I saw in a video that had Mark Cuban in it, and he said something that was kind of controversial. He kind of said he pushed against the point that you just made, that everybody talks about how you need to be passionate, how you need to have grit, all that, and that's good, right? Passion gets you pretty far. But the thing he said that I found kind of compelling was that that's not the entire story, right? If I'm really passionate about being a applied mathematician, for instance, and I'm really bad at math, I don't know if I'm going to be the best mathematician or be a successful mathematician. Part of it is innate, but also passion doesn't include the effort or the allocations that you make to meet that goal, right? So if I'm really passionate about a particular business idea, that's not going to ensure the success of that idea, right?
Yeah, I know. What I would say is that the word grit in the context of the book, it refers to, it's like all encompassing. It refers to all the work that goes into it. It refers to your passion, and it refers to the length of time you are dedicated to this certain project. And I think that Mark Cuban does make a point. There are other extraneous factors that to success, but I think ultimately people that are willing to do deliberate practice, people that are intentional, people that know what they want in life, well, most of the time they'll get it. If you can tell me, if I bet if someone can tell you exactly what they want in life and how they're going to achieve it, there's a pretty good chance they're going to achieve it. It's that some people just don't dream. They've been the ideas that they once had when they were more imaginative and ambitious are just been watered down as they get older. And I think that like that happens with us in childhood. Like we wanted to be so many like crazy things when we were kids, but we were told that they weren't attainable, so we never focused on any of them. And I think that almost anything can be accomplished through deliberate practice and just yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up there with how important grit is. And I think a lot of students kind of know this, and you notice this more when you meet students that are really passionate or people that want to get into academia, especially. People, specifically students, are so prone to kind of trying to shape themselves into fitting this grit slash passion person that they exert so much pressure on themselves. Part of that is accelerated by the grading system and the way that the education system treats students as cogs of machinery to excel as employees in the world rather than being ends in and of themselves as learners and promulgators of education. But I'm sure that with your experience with mental health, exerting that pressure on yourself must be devastating.
Oh my God. Okay. So yes, I mean before the very first time I took like my ACT in sophomore year, I was very very stressed. I was it got to the point where like I tried I couldn't concentrate on anything. Like the anxiety was overwhelming, and I still have this issue with test anxiety. I will know the content, the material being tested front to back. But you put me in a test. I'm a good test taker, but I suffer from test anxiety, and this test anxiety hinders me from like it messes with my memory retention, and like it makes me blank out. And this was a very big issue when I was younger, and still even a little bit now but I've known how to deal with it, and I have tools now. So yeah.
Well, how would you, when you faced that struggle, how did you try to cope with it and try
How did
to
I
bring yourself to the place that you are now?
Yeah. Well, I figured out the biggest cure to anxiety is to be prepared. Like I would for if I was gonna take the SAT, I would plan the drive, plan the day I'm having breakfast. What like everything. There is no variable that couldn't have accounted for. Like I like having my sense of control. Like it's all about the internal locus of control. It's a psychological term. You think that you determine the outcome. That's like I didn't want to think that my anxiety was the one determining the outcome. It was me and my will. So it was more about like ownership, taking ownership that worked for me.
And what advice do you have to people, students who are in the pandemic now and feel an ever stronger burden from themselves and the others around them to have to succeed in this already kind of depraved environment we're in?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I would I would say this to anyone who's just not feeling very motivated right now. It's find something that excites you. Like my mantra, something that find a hobby, even find something that will reignite your love for learning. Because I think that at the core, most humans are learners. We are intelligent beings that seek stimulation, seek excitement, seek learning as well. It just find something that invigorates your passion, like that your passion for learning, your passion for school. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be passionate about school. You just have to be passionate about learning,
Yeah,
because because at that point you can make any boring. That's something that happened to me because I had my little. I changed a lot and I started to love learning my junior year, and I started to make the most boring classes seem interesting. And that was like a really trick I learned. It just like if you can find certain aspects you like about a class, and that'll just propel you forward, and you'll never ever be faced with the problem, oh, it's so boring, I just can't sit down and study for it. If you find a way to like what you're reading. And I even use this on the trick on the SAT. I pretend that I was interested in the reading passages I was forced to read, and it actually worked. I've actually probably retained more information.
well, you got to tell me how you made a class that was boring interesting. I'm sure that I'm going to use this in the future. I wish I knew this, and I'm sure a lot of kids could use this when they're in high school and they're sitting through and they're thinking, when am I ever going to need to know this?
Oh yeah. Okay. So it was apes. I found this class very AP Environmental Science.
Okay.
I found this class very boring. And what I did to make it interesting was whenever we learned about a topic in class, I would try to find a one real world example like of it. Like how could this help me? So like we were talking about erosion, and immediately I'm like, well, we're having some of that in my backyard right now. Let's look. But like it's really like it tells you the science behind what something you see in the real life. Like it's very nice to see that something like that. Like if you can explain how a car works through science, how you can explain if you just know how the parts around you function, it's very exciting. It's like more knowledge. I just like the idea of learning that stuff.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, I think what you're pointing at is basically you're taking the information and you're contextualizing it to make it something more
Exactly.
relatable, personable, which is all we look for, right? Because you go to school and you learn about the Civil War, or you learn about polynomial roots, and you're thinking, well, how does this relate to me? I don't really care about this, and you have to make that jump and say, well, this is I have to make this kind of circuitous path and draw this to how this connects to me. Because
And yeah,
otherwise you're not going to be
yeah,
motivated to learn it unless you already like that thing.
yeah. Not only that, you have to connect it to your purpose. Like when I was about a junior, I figured out what I wanted out of my life, like in a variety of senses. And it was that feeling that that you have a purpose that makes learning something that makes learning like a very boring, redundant task. You can turn that into excitement because it's leading you towards your end goals. Like if you see, like I see these as very low level. You can see like your assignments for that class or tests for that class as low level goal, low hanging fruit that can propel you forward to your higher level goals. It's about accomplishing the very little tasks. It's all about the devil's in the details. That's all I'm saying. It's all about being detailed and meticulous, and that's all how you get 4.0s. You're very meticulous. You really have to be on top of everything.
So you mentioned that you knew what you wanted to do from the get-go. When you were a kid, did you have something you wanted to be when you grew up that was different from being a psychiatrist, or was
Yeah, yeah, really, for sure. Yeah, I wanted to be an NBA player, a marine biologist. There was a lot of interests. Like I had a variety of interests as a kid, and it was just my struggle with bipolar disorder that really set my career goals and my like life goals in stone almost. Like, yeah.
So when did you first find out that you were someone who had bipolar disorder?
Yeah, it's a funny story actually. So I was 12 years old, and I would start having anxiety that would lead to depression repeatedly and like over a span of 6 months. And I started this. Even I got suspicious. I'm like, I think there's something wrong here. I'm like, I tried to tell my parents this. I looked up bipolar disorder. I'm like, Mom, Dad, I think I have bipolar disorder. At some point, they kind of dismissed it for a very long time. Um, because at some point, and when I was 14, I made a PowerPoint presentation on why I have bipolar disorder. I still have like the draft, and yeah, it got to that point. But the reason why I was going to a psychologist at this time because I had anxiety, but I knew anxiety wasn't the problem, and he could tell that. So, but what a really bad experience I had was when I was 13. My parents took me to a psychiatrist for the very first time. Like there's a distinction between psychologists and psychiatrists. Psychiatrists are able to diagnose and prescribe medication, whereas psychologists are mainly there for counsel and like therapy. And I went to a psychiatrist. This was the guy who could get me my diagnosis. I told him that I thought I had bipolar disorder. He didn't really allow me to substantiate my claim, and he kind of dismissed it and just talked to my parents the whole time. And that was my first bad experience with a mental health care. And then the real reason, and another reason why I couldn't get diagnosed at that age, was because I had never had a manic episode, which is a very key component of bipolar disorder. And that takes me to when I was 16, when I had my first manic episode. You knew me at this time. You did know me at this time.
Yeah.
I was so basically there was some stressors within my home. I was very I was very agitated in general. So here's the symptoms. I was agitated. I was speaking very, very rapidly. I was hardly sleeping, and this led to me to becoming manic. And my parents took me to the hospital because I was acting ridiculous. Like I couldn't believe it. Like I was speaking I couldn't stop talking. I wasn't making sense. At some points I was delusional. It was pretty bad. And my parents admitted me to a hospital, and I was at an inpatient facility for the next 10 days. And this was the first time I'd ever received medication for any or ever. And it truly changed my life. And in this hospital, I met so many great people that I knew that I could help, because I figured out I had this gift that most people with bipolar disorder and mental illness don't, and it's self-awareness. I knew at a very young age that there was something quite wrong with me, and I advocated for myself. I trusted my intuition, and my intuition, finally, it was always right in the end. And it was a funny story. The way I decided I wanted to become a psychiatrist was I was looking in the mirror. Then at the mental hospital, they give you some scrubs, like things to wear. I looked in the mirror in scrubs, and I'm like, I would look pretty good in scrubs. So I think I was like, I'm gonna be a psychiatrist. I'm going to med school. And it wasn't that like that really superficial. It was more of this is my identity now. I'm no longer the kid that's troubled with mental illness. I'm a doctor. I'm a future doctor, and that's like really what has just propelled me forward. My grades got so much better after I got medication. Everything changed.
That's amazing. I'm really happy for you. I'm really inspired by how you took probably an experience that is very difficult for someone at that age to grapple with, and manage to embrace it and take it as something, as a positive force, right? Something that you can use
Yeah.
to become something that you really wanted to be. So, I mean, you described your first kind of adverse experience with a psychiatrist. What what part of the mental health industry, if that's what you want to call it, what part of that do you want to fix most as a psychiatrist?
as a psychiatrist, I want to rotate between academia and research as well as my private practice, and that's what ideally. But I want to focus more on like the research aspect of it. I want to look more at the pharmacology, and like there are so many promising like gene therapies out there that I just want to get my hands at this point. I want to do that kind of research right now. That's like I'm very excited. This is like the stuff that really keeps me up at night, keeps me excited, like mental health advances. I just want to get advancements. And like on a more public health like scale, I would just like more awareness, but rather education. Education leads to awareness. You can make people aware of it, but you have to educate them first. And there is a mental health treatment gap in this country. Like due to insurance prices make these buying these medications that are very crucial to your well-being very hard. Like even insulin, like you see some had I not had insurance, I would be paying out of pocket almost thousands of dollars per year on my medications. So there are some barriers for mental health access, and there's still a stigma in this country. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Especially when you said, I want to touch the first thing you said, which is that awareness doesn't work unless you have people who are educated, because you can tell everybody about XYZ, and if they don't actually understand XYZ, there's no, I mean, you wasted your time and effort in
Yeah.
making them aware of it. So I think that I definitely agree. I think you need to educate first. And that's the hard part. I think that's probably why people don't do it, because it's not easy, right? To
Yeah.
explain someone what the issue is. And once that happens, then you can talk about, well, let's try to spread this information. As for the second component, I think that's such an important issue to talk about, especially when it comes to public health, because when we think public health, what do we immediately, our mind conjures up the image of vaccines, drugs, physical health. We don't think of mental health or well-being in that way as being part of the conversation in public health, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I think that we could draw that right back to how the education system treats us as machinery. I mean, we're expected to produce our grades as mere outputs, that we just attend school, we churn out these good grades through work, and those are the indicators of success. And anything else that could hamper that is our fault. And that's not dealt with because that requires more work. And why would they put more work in education, right?
I
So I think mental health is one of those things that is becoming more and more prevalent in students today, and it's kind of surprising. Steven Pinker once said, "It's shocking how dangerous mental health is becoming, given that Americans and people in general are being better, well fed, they're living longer lives, healthier lives, and yet we are having the highest rates of depression in human history."
Yeah, I mean, stress, depression, and pessimism, they're all linked to lower life expectancy. Like there are even if they gave people with heart conditions that had the same exact heart condition, same all basically same like specifications, body and everything. And they found that one of them was an optimist and the other was a pessimist. The optimist outlived the pessimist greatly, even with a chronic condition that was going to kill them, and they lived longer. And I mean, it just shows that your outlook on life determines a lot more than you think. Like if you are cynical, pessimistic, you will get that in return. It's you will attract the things that you subconsciously say you want.
So suppose in 150 years that the sciences failed to save us, and all that remains from you is a book about your life.
Yeah.
What would the title be, and what would the blurb under it tell us about Vishal Suthram?
Okay. It's going to be called Larger Than Life. The the um, the the triumphant life of Vishal Suthram. There.
What are you trying to get at with the larger than life title? What does that mean to you?
Okay, so the name Vishal means larger than life. And
Okay.
like a lot of people when they describe my personality, they'd say it's a very big. It's a very big personality. It's kind of them saying I'm annoying, but no, very discreet way. But I guess I'll take it. And yeah, and I feel like I don't know. Like when I was at a young age, I always felt like I had something special, something like I was gonna do something special with my life. I don't know if this is just some way of my way of just trying to distinguish myself from others, but it's just something that I just felt different in a lot of ways. Probably because I had a mental illness, but that I just felt very I just felt like I just I just had I think the feeling the idea that you should claim that you're special, it literally it will take you so far. If you acknowledge the gifts that you have, and like you will have success, I think. Because it took a while for me to it's all about self-appreciation and like knowing your strengths. Like I know my strengths pretty well.
Yeah, touching on what you just said about being encouraged and reinforced when you're younger. And I'm sure in your mental health journey, you probably relied on you know, the encouragement of several people who acted as a positive force with you. So what was like the best compliment that you received that you can remember?
Hmm. It is someone it came from my psychologist. He said, "You would, I don't even you have changed. You've like he said in like the few months that I was with him. He said I changed as a person more than he's ever seen anyone change. He said that I've become a proponent of positive change. I've become very I've become very organized, all in a span of months, and like and maybe even when and there's another one I received when I was due to my medications, some of the medications I was taking earlier on with my bipolar, like when I was a year or two ago, I became slightly overweight. I think you probably saw me when I was slightly overweight. You can attest to this. Uh, I lost about 35 pounds in 4 months, and when people finally realized that I'd been so dedicated, and I received compliments toward that, and it really reinforced my drive to succeed and keep working, keep grinding.
That's amazing. Yeah, I that's a beautiful statement. Um, I know that in high school, you and I, we talked about things like this, and we would have kind of unorthodox opinions on things. So tell me something that's true that nobody agrees with you on, or at least a lot of people wouldn't agree with you on, but that's something that you really believe in.
Um, let's see. I mean, I think even science agrees with me here. I think meditation and yoga are some of the best things to enrich your life and like have a longer lifespan. I think that people who meditate and people who do yoga will live a lot longer than people who don't.
Do you meditate often?
Yes, I do.
Is that something you got into recently, or were you always?
Over quarantine, actually, I ran out of I was taking up almost every self improvement thing, and I'm like, why not try meditating? Like, okay, so I did that, and I stick with it, and um, I think that oh yeah, another something that I think is true: habits should be easy to form.
Habits should be easy to form.
Yes, habits are easy to form.
Does that relate to bad habits that you want to break? Should they be easy
No,
to?
not easy. It's harder to break them, but it's very easy to form good. It's not as hard as you think to form good habits. Because I was reading in the book Atomic Habits. It's all like he broke all of his habits down into smaller habits, and like he would have let's say you wanted to become your end goal was to read every day. First, he'd start out with 1 page every day. Then it would go to 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, and slowly you're tricking your mind into doing something that would have been difficult for you because it's incremented, and you're just and like maybe the 1 page is enough, maybe 2 pages is enough, like that kind of thing.
I get that reminds me of some similar advice I get when I talk to artists, and they're always saying, it's not about how good your work is compared to other people. It's how good your work is compared to your past work.
Exactly.
And it's we always think like it's the hardest part is sitting there and getting out a piece of paper, finding your reference and getting that pen and starting and just draw for even if it's for 5 minutes every day.
80% of just getting doing well is just showing up, dude. Literally, like if you just like this happened to me with journaling. I'm like, oh, I don't think I could journal. Like it seems like a lot of work. I don't want to talk about my day, but like I forced myself, not forced, but I allocated some time to journal each day. And if I just wrote, I made a word limit, 20 words. If I could type out 20 words about my day, slowly I'd become more, I'd want, there would be more things to talk about. And I'd increase the word limit slowly until I was able to write like whole pages about just reflecting.
So in your entire pathway from working with being bipolar and trying to rebuild yourself, have you become more or less religious in any way?
Well, I don't really affiliate with any religion, but I do like practices associated with Hinduism, like meditation and yoga. I really do. I mean, I do like a lot of the Eastern religions. I read a lot of the texts of the Eastern religions in like an objective manner because they're very wise. Like I really think they're wise, and I should learn. There's a lot I could learn from them.
So suppose that for the purpose of this question that heaven exists, right? Pretend heaven exists. What would you like to hear God say when you arrive in heaven at the pearly gates?
Uh,
What's
you
the
did
first
well. You did well, Vishal. You did well. You did well.
you want him to tell you did good job?
No, not just that. That sounds very superficial. I want him to say, "You've changed the world." There,
Yeah.
something like
I
that.
think, I think when we're all at this age and we just think, you know what do I want to be when I grow up? I want to change the world. That's what I want to do. That's
I feel like that's a lot of people in our generation as well. I feel like we're so focused on impact that we don't really like. Sometimes we lose scope of like what we wanted, like how to get there. You
yeah,
know?
yeah. I think a lot of us it's like I don't care about the means right now. Just as long as the end is this,
Yeah, exactly.
whatever road gets me there, gets me there.
Yeah.
Um, well, okay, before I want to close out, I want to ask you something that I ask every guest, and that's what's your favorite quote or favorite group of words that you're thinking about, something you
Okay.
live by, anything you're thinking about these days.
Hold on, I'll pull it up. Okay, Steve Jobs once said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you want to become." Steve Jobs, powerful. That really was powerful when I first read it.
Well, it's been wonderful talking with you, Vishal. Thank you.
Likewise, Sharia.
Thank you.